Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We're just so glad you're here with us today, and we've built this exploration specifically for you, the learner.
Yeah, it's a really exciting one.
It is. Today, we are unpacking a stack of wildly ambitious sources authored by James R. Massengale, Jr. He's a thinker who actually describes himself as an epistemic immunity engineer.
Which is quite the title.
Right, and the specific text we are diving into is his dissertation draft. It's titled The Resurrection Bootstrap. You know, historically, when map makers reach the edge of the known world, they draw these, terrifying sea monsters and write, "Here be dragons."
Yeah, exactly. The edge of the map.
Right. It was their way of saying, we have absolutely no idea what happens past this line. So
Yeah.
our mission today is to look at how Massengale approaches the ultimate "Here be dragons" line in modern physics and tries to apply it to ancient theology.
And I have to say, it is a genuinely staggering piece of interdisciplinary architecture. I mean, Massengale is attempting to map the resurrection of Jesus Christ not as a purely mystical or, rule-breaking event, but as a physically consistent information-preserving event using quantum mechanics and singularity physics.
Oh, wow. And I want to be super clear right up front. We are entirely impartial here. We aren't taking sides on the theological claims or endorsing the religious viewpoints.
Absolutely not.
Our goal is to look at the sheer structural engineering of this argument. Like, how do you even begin to build a bridge between the highest levels of theoretical physics and ancient theology? Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the physics, because the source text builds its foundation on what is arguably the ultimate paradox in modern science.
Yeah, to really understand Massengale's framework, you first have to grasp the massive glaring clash between the two most successful scientific theories of the 20th century, which are general relativity and quantum mechanics. I mean, they are fundamentally incompatible at the extremes.
They do not play nicely together at all.
No, they actively contradict one another. So general relativity is Einstein's masterpiece, right? It describes gravity, the macroscopic universe, the shape of space-time. It's smooth and it's continuous.
Right.
But its own math predicts these things called classical singularity. So like the center of a black hole or the very moment of the Big Bang. At a singularity, space-time just ends. Curvature becomes infinite.
That's the geographical dead end, the literal "here be dragons" on the math paper.
Exactly. But then you have quantum mechanics, which is the physics of the incredibly small. And quantum mechanics has a strict, unbreakable rule called unitary evolution.
Which means?
To put it simply, information cannot be destroyed, ever. The universe keeps a perfect, indestructible ledger of every single quantum state. So if a physical object with quantum information falls into a black hole, a singularity general relativity says the information is crushed out of existence.
But quantum mechanics says...
Quantum mechanics says that is strictly forbidden.
Which creates the infamous black hole information paradox. It's almost like trying to play a video game where two completely different physics engines are running at the exact same time.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like one engine is calculating massive gravity, the other is calculating tiny collisions. And when you push your character to the extreme edge of the map, a singularity, the two engines completely disagree on the underlying math, and the whole system just aggressively glitches out.
That video game analogy actually perfectly captures the tension. Those glitches are the paradoxes physicists have been fighting over for decades now. And Massengale steps into this exact paradox with a massive proposition.
Okay.
He suggests that time-symmetric Einstein-Rosen bridges, which, most people just call wormholes, allow quantum states to flow both forward and backward through these extreme points.
Hey, forward and backward in time. How does that not just completely break causality?
Well, he proposes what he calls a singularity manifold. In this view, all singularities in the universe are fundamentally connected on a single underlying structure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The perceived differences, like the catastrophic, crushing collapse of a dying star versus the explosive generative birth of the Big Bang, are merely perspective-dependent projections. It just depends on which side of the manifold you're standing on.
Wait, I need to make sure I'm tracking this. He's saying a black hole and the Big Bang are basically the same door, just viewed from the inside versus the outside.
The math allows for that interpretation, yes. The manifold is a continuous structure, so information isn't destroyed at a singularity. It actually traverses the manifold.
Yeah, if the singularity manifold acts as this universal bridge and information traverses it, Does Massengale think this is just a blind, chaotic, cosmic garbage disposal? Or can something specific like, say, a biological body be deliberately sent through it and retrieved? Because that seems like a massive leap.
And it is a huge leap, and to answer that, the author introduces a highly specific two-stage framework. He builds a very rigid architecture to explain exactly how that retrieval would work, and be prepared, because he uses some intense acronyms to lock this all together.
Yeah, let's break those acronyms down, because if you were listening to this and your eyes are glazing over at the jargon, we really need to translate this into plain English.
Right, so the primary cosmological structure is called CST, which stands for collapse, singularity, transcendence. That's the journey the physical body takes. But the mathematical engine driving that journey is TCS, which is topology, combinatorics, spline.
Hold on, spline, like the curved line tool you use in graphic design software.
Yeah, pretty much.
How does a graphic design term keep a human's data intact inside a black hole?
It's actually a great comparison. In mathematics, a spline is a piecewise polynomial. It's a function that connects separate data points smoothly without any jagged breaks. Massengale is arguing that the universe uses a mathematical spline to seamlessly stitch the quantum data of the body back together.
Okay, I see.
It ensures that the curve of a person's existence, like their consciousness and their physical blueprint, remains completely continuous even when passing through the singularity.
Oh, that makes total sense. So topology is the 3D shape of the data. Combinatorics is the complex ledger of how all the particles are arranged. And the spline is the mathematical thread tying the before state to the after state without breaking.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism he's proposing, and wrapping all of this together is a concept he calls EIE, or epistemic immunity engineering, which tests the moral and logical coherence of the entire event.
I do want to get to the epistemic immunity part in a second, but let's put the CST framework to the test first. Let's walk through stage 1 of this resurrection bootstrap. What actually happens to the physical body in the tomb? Are we talking about molecular vaporization?
According to the text, the physical body undergoes a Planck-scale collapse, entering that singularity manifold we just talked about. And this initiates a process the author calls Dirac decoupling.
Okay, I have to advocate for the listener here. Dirac decoupling sounds incredibly dense. What is practically happening to the biology?
Think of it as separating the raw quantum information from the physical spatial coordinates. The macroscopic form, the flesh, the bones collapses out of classical spacetime.
Okay.
But the foundational quantum information that makes up that body is completely, flawlessly preserved. It is detached from our local gravity and time.
So it basically gets zipped up into an indestructible quantum file and removed from the physical desktop of the universe.
Exactly. And here is the truly staggering cosmological claim the source makes. The text states that this decoupling instantiates the world line through a Big Bang trajectory.
Wait, what?
Stage 1 is cosmologically generative. By pushing the biological information through the singularity manifold, it effectively fine-tunes the inception of the universe itself to permit the eventual return of that specific information.
Okay, I have to push back hard here. Penrose and Hawking formulated singularity theorems to describe collapsed stars and the literal birth of the cosmos. Isn't it a massive, almost reckless leap to take math meant for galaxies and apply it to a single human biology in the first century?
It sounds like it, yeah.
Are we honestly saying the literal birth of the universe and a localized bodily resurrection are utilizing the exact same underlying cosmic plumbing?
What's fascinating here is that, mathematically, if you accept his premise, the framework actually demands it, because the singularity manifold connects all singularities. Traversing it inevitably connects you to the foundational singularity of the Big Bang. You can't enter the plumbing without having access to the main waterline.
Wow. Okay, so the data is in the plumbing. That brings us to stage 2, which is rematerialization. How does the body come back without just being a ghost or like a glitch?
If stage 1 is Dirac decoupling, stage 2 is Dirac recoupling. The preserved quantum states protected by that mathematical spline are reintegrated back into local spacetime. The Higgs field, which is the fundamental field that gives particles mass in our universe, restores the physical weight and solidity of the body.
But how does the universe not reject it? If you just drop a fully formed human back into reality, shouldn't that violate conservation of energy?
That's where a concept called gauge symmetry comes in. The text argues that gauge symmetry acts like the universe's internal accounting system. It ensures that every single quantum number, electrical charge, and fundamental field balances out perfectly.
So the math just equals out.
Exactly. The accounting ledger goes to zero, so no conservation laws are violated. The restored body is biologically and quantumly identical to the original, reconstructed from the data preserved in the manifold.
So the physics engine doesn't crash.
It doesn't crash. And the author makes a crucial distinction here that we really need to highlight. The physics, the Planck scale collapse, the Dirac recoupling, the gauge symmetry, that only provides the mechanism. It is just the map. The framework states that God's unique agency provides the reason, the why.
I see. So the argument is that God isn't breaking the physics engine of the universe to perform a miracle. God is utilizing the deepest, most complex administrative privileges of the physics engine. It's a feature, not a bug.
Beautifully said. But of course, building a model this complex, combining extreme theoretical physics and ancient theology, it desperately needs to be tested for flaws. You can't just make these claims in a vacuum.
Which brings us to the stress test. And I genuinely respect this part of the source material. The author proactively stress tests their own model. They don't just put it out there and hide behind faith. They evaluate it against multiple scientific disciplines.
Yes, and they use Roger Penrose's massive, highly respected textbook, The Road to Reality, as their baseline for the physics.
Using Penrose is setting an incredibly high bar. He is a heavyweight, a Nobel laureate who worked closely with Stephen Hawking on these exact singularity theorems.
He really is. By grounding the math in Penrose's work, Massengale forces his own theory to survive the strictest possible classical and quantum scrutiny.
But the author is also surprisingly honest about the vulnerabilities of the text, right? He admits where the math gets shaky.
Very honest. The stress test openly flags that Planck scale collapse and macroscopic Dirac recoupling are highly speculative. I mean, we simply do not have a fully predictive theory of quantum gravity yet.
Right.
Reconstructing a complex macroscopic biological body from decoupled quantum fields is entirely beyond current empirical science.
It works beautifully on the chalkboard, but we can't build it in a lab.
Exactly. Furthermore, that massive claim about the Big Bang, the assumption that the universe's inception is fine-tuned for this one specific historical event is cosmologically non-falsifiable. We cannot observe the necessary signatures in the cosmic microwave background.
Right, you can't stick a thermometer into the Big Bang to check if it was fine-tuned for one guy in Jerusalem.
You really can't. But despite those massive empirical limits, the author's stress test highlights some serious theoretical strengths. First, the model is internally coherent. It balances its own math. Second, it avoids what the text calls unnecessary multiplicity.
Meaning it doesn't rely on parallel universes or infinite multiverses to solve the information paradox. It uses the universe we actually live in.
Yes. And crucially, it passes the EIE test, that epistemic immunity engineering we mentioned earlier. The text argues that the physical steps of this bootstrap are entirely non-coercive. It preserves moral alignment and human agency.
Let's give the listener an analogy for that, because epistemic immunity is a pretty dense phrase. Think of it like a software update on your smartphone that happens at 3 a.m. It completely rewrites the operating system, but it does it quietly in the background.
That's a great way to think about it.
It doesn't force you to stop using your phone during the day, and it doesn't override your free will to ignore the new features. It operates perfectly within the background permissions without breaking the sky open to prove it happened.
That background update analogy perfectly captures the non-coercive nature of the framework. But this raises an inevitable practical problem. If the theoretical physics are beyond current experimental verification, and we can't see the fine-tuning in the Big Bang, is there any physical, earthly evidence to ground this theory?
Yeah, where is the receipt? If this singularity event happened on Earth, did it leave a mark? And that lack of astronomical observation forces the author to pivot directly to his most controversial empirical boundary, which is the Shroud of Turin.
The shroud is absolutely central to Massengale's argument, but he doesn't treat it the way religious historians typically do.
No, the text lays out highly specific physical claims about the shroud. It argues the cloth possesses fine-grained 3D topology encoded in the image. It has superficial thermal and chemical effects on the extreme outer layer of the fibers that classical biological decomposition simply cannot explain.
Right.
Basically, dead bodies rotting in a cave do not behave like a 3D laser printer.
Because of those anomalies, the author treats the shroud not merely as a religious relic, but as a rigid epistemic constraint, a boundary condition for the physics.
Okay, boundary condition. Translate that for us.
So in physics, a boundary condition is a known, observable data point that any viable mathematical model has to satisfy. If you build a model of a bridge, and your math says the bridge should hold 1,000 cars, but the actual physical bridge collapses under 10 cars.
Your model failed the boundary condition.
Exactly. The author argues that if your model of reality, or your model of this specific historical event, cannot explain the unique, anomalous physical properties of the shroud, then your model is fundamentally incomplete.
So how does the shroud actually connect to the CST resurrection bootstrap? How does the math explain the cloth?
Within this framework, the shroud is interpreted as the, and this is a direct quote, surface artifact of a singular interior event.
Surface artifact.
When the biological body underwent that Planck scale collapse we discussed, when it entered the singularity manifold during stage 1, that violent process of Dirac decoupling emitted a specific physical trace. The shroud is literally the projection left behind as the massive amount of quantum information detached from classical spacetime.
Oh, wow. It's like, imagine a rocket ship equipped with an experimental hyperdrive. It's sitting on the launch pad, and right at the exact millisecond it vanishes into hyperspace. The sudden, violent burst of exotic physics leaves a highly specific, totally unexplainable scorch mark baked into the concrete.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right. The scorch mark isn't the rocket, and it isn't the journey. It's just the surface artifact of the moment the system completely breaks the classical rules of the map.
That scorch mark analogy hits the nail on the head. The framework demands that a singularity-mediated event of this magnitude happening in local space-time must leave a physical signature. Energy has to go somewhere. The author argues the shroud is that exact signature. Ignoring it, according to the text, isn't just theological skepticism, it's epistemically irresponsible.
So we have theoretical cosmology, we have mathematical splines, we have physical scorch marks on ancient linen. But to really grasp this deep dive, we have to address the human element. Because halfway through these sources, there's a massive, almost jarring shift in tone.
It really is a striking transition. You almost feel like you are reading a different author.
We go from reading a highly academic, peer-review style dissertation on gauge symmetry and Dirac equations to these blog posts written in what the author affectionately calls a down-and-dirty, fat electrician style.
Yeah, the author adopts this incredibly gritty, first-person, highly colloquial voice.
It's all about stripping the high-minded concepts down, as he says, to the wiring. He even uses this hilarious analogy where he compares certain modern theological movements, like Christian Zionism, to a half-wired junction box.
That part was fascinating.
He essentially says people are slapping labels on the electrical breakers, but nobody actually knows how the system works behind the drywall when you flip the switches. It is a completely different vibe than citing Roger Penrose.
The tone shifts, but the underlying methodology remains surprisingly consistent. He takes that gritty, blue-collar, no-nonsense approach and applies it to historical apologetics. He introduces Leslie's 4 marks to try and validate the historical reality of the event without any of the quantum physics.
Charles Leslie, right? An older theologian. What are the 4 marks?
Leslie argued that for an ancient historical event to be considered undeniably true, it must meet 4 very strict criteria. First, it must be accessible to the outward senses. People had to physically see it and hear it. Second, it must be public, not just a secret revelation whispered to one guy in a cave.
Makes sense.
Third, it must involve immediate memorial or action. And fourth, it must spark a contemporaneous institution, meaning an organization formed immediately around the event by the exact people who were there.
And the author just aggressively ticks these boxes in that fat electrician tone. Senses, check. Public, check. Immediate action, check. Contemporaneous institution. The early church forming in Jerusalem right under the noses of the authorities who wanted them dead, check. But my absolute favorite part of this whole section, the part that really grounds it for me, is when he brings up his ultimate piece of historical evidence, which is James, the brother of Jesus.
James is such a fascinating figure to zero in on for this context.
Right, because think about the psychology here. James knew all the family secrets. He grew up in the same house. The text points out he was skeptical as hell. If your brother grew up and claimed to be the center of the universe, you'd roll your eyes. You'd think he was crazy.
Naturally.
James didn't believe it during the entire ministry. But then suddenly, James does a complete 180 and transitions to leading the Jerusalem church, eventually dying for that exact belief.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that sudden, inexplicable shift in human behavior acts as another form of observable data. It's a completely different discipline than physics, but it functions exactly the same way in Massengale's model.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Within the author's framework, the radical psychological and historical conversion of a profound skeptic like James and the explosion of the early church itself are treated precisely like the shroud.
Wait, really? The psychology of a first-century sibling is treated like a quantum boundary condition?
Yes. They are both observable surface artifacts. The shroud is the physical artifact left on the linen by the physics. James's sudden, irrational willingness to die for a previously rejected belief is the psychological artifact left on human history. Both are traces of that same singular interior event.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
He is using quantum physics and historical human skepticism as two sides of the exact same epistemic coin. He's saying, look at the linen. Classical decomposition can't explain it without a singularity. Now look at the brother. Human psychology can't explain his complete reversal without a profound encounter. Both are boundary conditions that demand an explanation.
It is a relentless demand for consistency across every available data set. He refuses to compartmentalize. He demands that the explanation for the Planck scale physics must flawlessly align with the explanation for first-century family dynamics.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's synthesize the incredible scope of this deep dive. We've journeyed from the absolute edges of Einstein's math through the singularity manifold to the launch pad scorch marks of ancient history, and finally into the mind of a skeptical brother.
It's quite the journey.
The author, James R. Mathengale Jr., has attempted to build an unbroken, mathematically logical bridge between the most abstract levels of theoretical physics and one of the oldest theological mysteries in human history. He is fundamentally claiming that information, whether it is quantum data, biological blueprints, or spiritual identity, is absolutely never lost to the universe.
He has constructed a reality where theology doesn't break physics. Instead, theology is presented as the ultimate, highest-level application of physics.
And for you, the learner, why should you care about this? Even if you are wildly skeptical of the theology, or if you think the quantum gravity math is way too speculative to trust, you should care, because this is an absolute masterclass in extreme interdisciplinary thinking.
It absolutely is.
It shows that by taking a rigid, unforgiving framework from one discipline like quantum information theory and singularity mechanics, and fearlessly overlaying it on an entirely different field like first-century history and human psychology, you can generate completely novel, mind-expanding perspectives. It forces you out of your intellectual silos and proves that reality might be vastly more connected than we think.
It proves that the most fascinating insights almost always hide in the spaces between our established disciplines, right where the map seems to end.
Exactly. And it leaves me with one final lingering thought, a question for you to mull over long after you take your headphones off today. If Massengale's physics model is even partially right, wait, let me rephrase that. If all singularities are truly connected on a single, continuous manifold where no information is ever destroyed, but simply waiting to be translated, what other lost historical or physical information might theoretically be swirling around in that cosmic plumbing, just waiting for the right physics to decipher it?
That is a wild thought.
We've only mapped the surface of reality. We are just now starting to realize that the places on the map where we used to write, "Here be the dragons," might actually be the doors to the rest of the universe.